There's an interesting phrase in today's first reading, and we're going to look at it in a second. But as you know, we're continuing the story of the Acts of the Apostles. Now, imagine this is kind of like a movie. So we just saw the scene where Stephen was martyred, and we saw that he was being he was surrounded by this crowd, and they were ready to stone him, and he looked up in the sky and saw Jesus look down upon him. And of course, he's the only one who saw this. Otherwise, everyone would have stopped. And he starts talking about the wonders of knowing Christ and the glory of God. I can look at that, look up that exact phrase here. And he does all that, looks at the glory of God and all that, and then they stone him to death. And as you remember, yesterday in the scene, we have, it ends with Saul being the one who consented to this whole thing. And we all know that Saul becomes Paul. Well, what happens from there is now we're in the 8th chapter. Now, let me go back for a second and explain. He is there, but he, being filled with the Holy Spirit and gazing intently toward heaven, saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, "Behold, I see the heavens opened and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." And of course, that sends people absolutely ballistic. And then they block their ears, they rush him, and they stone him. And of course, as I just said, Saul consents to this whole thing. Well, we begin now with chapter 8. That was chapter 7. And we begin now chapter 8. And chapter 8 is just a continuation. By the way, in case you don't know this, when these books were originally written, there were no chapters, there were no verses, there weren't anything. And those things were added later for exactly the reason why we use them as good reference, so that we can have a better understanding of how to find a particular a particular passage. Sorry. So now we're looking at Paul. So why don't we look at what's going on here? In those days, there occurred a great persecution against the church. This happens immediately after the stoning of Stephen. Again, so it was against the church at Jerusalem, and they were all dispersed through the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. So this is a real important dynamic, because what happens? There's the persecution, and people are leaving. And what are they doing when they're leaving? They're carrying the faith with them. This is how the faith is being spread. And the apostles right now are staying in Jerusalem. But God-fearing men arranged for Stephen's funeral. Now wait, think about that for a second. God-fearing men. Well, what about the people who, in the name of orthodoxy, so to speak, in the name of their devotedness to the Jewish faith, what about those people? Weren't they God-fearing men? They were, in fact, but obviously they weren't fully aware of what God was doing. And this other group, which obviously become the Christians, are described as the God-fearing men. That's an important distinction. And they made a great mourning over him. Interesting thing, because Paul always tells us in 1 Corinthians, remember, we believe in eternal life. So keep that in mind, that the one we loved is destined to be united with Christ. Now, that's an interesting thing that he says in 1 Corinthians, because people will stop. No, we don't know that for a fact. Well, we know the way Paul talked, and it's true. We don't know the whole story behind it. We don't know exactly what happens after someone dies, in light of whether they go to heaven or not, but we expect them to go to heaven. That's the thing, and you'll find that in the funeral liturgy. A lot of people say, well, don't say they're all in heaven. Well, then change the funeral liturgy, because it's actually in the funeral liturgy. And they made a great mourning over him. Then Saul was laying waste to the church. Remember, this is the same Saul who ultimately becomes Paul, who ultimately consented to the death of Stephen. Then Saul was laying waste to the church by entering throughout the houses and dragging away men and women and committing them to prison. Talk about the need for the Fourth Amendment, the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, and all the Bill of Rights. Of course, this didn't exist then, and Paul is acting on behalf of the synagogue of the temple. In that way, he's acting. So he's not acting on the behalf of the civil authorities, the Romans. He's acting on the way of the temple, and they are thrown into a temple that was run by prison that was run by the temple, not run by the Romans, as far as I know. Therefore, those who had been dispersed were traveling around evangelizing the word of God. So what did I just say? What happens? They all, as it says earlier in this passage, they all head out for the regions of Judea and Samaria, and they are evangelizing at the same time. So this is one of the ways that the Lord is allowing for evangelization, or encouraging it, or causing it, I guess the best way to put it. Now Philip, descending to a city of Samaria, was preaching Christ to them, and the crowd was listening intently, and with one accord to these things which were being said by Philip, and they were watching the signs. Remember, he was doing signs, which he was accomplishing. For many of them had unclean spirits, and crying out with a loud voice, these departed from them. Have I ever seen that? Yes, I have. I'll tell you, you can. Was a priest by the name of Father Rufus Pereira, a real exorcist, by the way. But he, instead of preaching about talking to demons and all this other stuff, which I never heard him say, he preached about the power of the sacrament of reconciliation, the sacraments, and he preached on, the things that lead people to be possessed or influenced by the demonic. But keep in mind that he was nothing like what you would see on YouTube today. He was an excellent person, very devout, the whole bit, and I'm positive if you were to hand him a gun, he would not accept it. Now, you might say, what in the world are you talking about? Look it up. You'll find out. So, in any case, he was a real powerful preacher, and he was known for that exact thing in India, and I've seen him when he preaches, you can hear that kind of stuff. Yes, that stuff is real. So, in any way, he is no longer living. He is with Christ in heaven. Now, Philip, descending to a city of Samaria, was preaching Christ to them. And the crowd was listening intently with one accord, and we went through this. So, for many of them had unclean spirits, crying out with a loud voice, and these departed from them. And many of the paralytics and the lame were cured. So remember what I said. These are signs being sent to proclaim that this is the power of God. The power of God is there. That's why those signs are there. So they're watching their signs. They're seeing these signs, and people are seeing that and realizing that this is this power. But remember, at the same time, there are others who are trying to silence all this. So then we continue. Therefore, there was great gladness in this city. Okay. And so this is that whole story of what continues. So while this is going on, this powerful thing is going on, you've got Saul trying to stop it. He's not listening to Gamaliel, who we heard a few days ago. You got Saul trying to stop it, saying, no, this must stop. And ultimately, we're going to see what happens with Saul. because they're ignoring all their signs. They're ignoring this, and they've got hardness of heart, and they are seeking to silence the voice of God and silence this whole powerful movement, yet the people are seeing something different. And like I said, you're seeing these people being healed, paralytics. I understand that this is the time when people realize that that medicine was, to say it wasn't advanced was obviously an understatement. This is 1,700 years before the days when people would leech people. They might have been doing it then too, but records of people leeching people to heal them. This is 1,700 years before that. The medicine is just awful. And now you have these people who have no hope of not being paralyzed. None, zip, are being healed. And suddenly they're able to walk, and suddenly they're able to move, which is powerful for them, powerful for people who are seeing this as a sign, and powerful for their caregivers. And remember, there's no electronic anything at the time. So obviously, we're looking at all this and saying the tremendous suffering. I remember when I was in Ecuador, there was a man who had suffered a stroke and couldn't do anything. And we were living in a town which was like the Old West. And all he could do was lay in a hammock and do nothing. Horrible situation where there were lights, but that was about it. And outside, literally, is dust street. It was literally like the Old West. And absolutely, except for the gunshots and all the other stuff. And that's the kind of situation they lived in. And all of a sudden, if this was there, this man would suddenly be healed. We're going to be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and something I want to talk about. I happened to read a column by Patrick Madrid. Now, this is not meant as an editorial comment. I read it kind of by accident. Somehow it came into my feed on Substack. He's at patrickmadrid.substack.com, and I'm not a follower of Patrick Madrid. So just so you know, and it's not any comment about him one way or the other. It's just I'm not a follower. So anyway, he wrote a column about a priest who gave this intense fire and brimstone homily or sermon. There's a difference. Sermon. And, this is just wonderful and the whole bit. And I absolutely hated this. I hated this column, and so much so that I'm writing a Substack in response. Because what did he do? He preached that fire and brimstone, which, by the way, is church teaching, what he said, but is it effective church teaching? And here's what I'm saying. It was the old style that we heard back prior to Vatican II. Now, that's not necessarily mean it's bad, but let me put it this way. This was not Fulton J. Sheen. And that's important to say. Now, he doesn't say who the name of the priest is or anything like that. But he said he gave a sermon. Remember, it's a sermon, not a homily. What is a homily? A homily is a talk based on the readings at Mass. A sermon is basically a moralizing talk. And he called people winners and losers. Oh, we're going to get in trouble right then and there. Because he calls them winners and losers. I hate that term. I hate that concept when you're talking about the church. So he calls them winners and losers. And he says that that the sinners are receiving the Eucharist even though they are in mortal sin. Okay, should you do that? No, you shouldn't. Well, actually, a better term, shouldn't is kind of a very generic term. There's a reason for that. But, and I have a whole teaching on that. It's not what this guy teaches. And so he names certain sins, and these are all mortal sins, which they weren't necessarily mortal sins. And they were all mortal sins, and people are still receiving, and they're receiving this, and that's a sacrilege, and they are losers going to hell is basically, he didn't go word for word, and that's a paraphrase. Well, wait a minute. I'm sitting there reading this, and I remember these talks. Okay, let me come from another perspective. During COVID was a perfect time to talk about receiving the Eucharist. It was perfect because a lot of people were afraid to receive because of COVID. So what I did was, and it was during a time where people are saying that, the politicians they've been saying this forever, but politicians need to be excommunicated. They want to sit around. They want them excommunicated. Well, that would cause more harm than good. But what I gave is a homily many times, and an instruction many times, was to explain that, number one, if you didn't want to come receive the Eucharist because of COVID, that's fine. And you can do a spiritual communion if you want. But what I did is I explained what the Eucharist is, which this priest did not. It's just, you come and you have a mortal sin, you're a loser on your way to hell. Well, here's the way I would put it. Because we believe the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ. We actually believe the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ. And therefore, we believe that Jesus is God. He is the second person of the Trinity. How do you approach God? You approach God on his terms, not yours. And at the time, the big issue was politicians who support abortion, who people were saying should be excommunicated. But no one was giving this instruction. So you always approach God on his terms, and you always approach him humbly. So if you walk down the aisle to receive the Eucharist on your terms, I don't care what God says, I'm going to do what I want, I don't care that, then that's never the way you approach God. And that's where we get into the whole issue with sacrilege, because what does that build in you? It builds a hardened heart. And trust me, I have met people who have hardened hearts, and they are scary people. They may not appear that to you. You might say, wow, this great person, the whole bit. But I've literally, and I don't know what this is, but I've literally been able to feel that obstinate attitude when I'm around some of these people. And it is rather intense. Now, maybe that's a spiritual gift, or maybe it's just that's the way they come. I don't know. I have no idea. All I know is, dealing with, I'm going to do things my way, and you can just sense it. So, in any case, that's why you always want to approach God humbly. And so then I would say, if you don't feel you're ready to receive the Eucharist, that's okay. And you don't receive the Eucharist, that honors God. Because you're saying, I'm not ready to do this. And maybe you are. Maybe you feel you're in sin, or maybe you are in sin and you feel your sin is serious enough that you shouldn't receive the Eucharist without going to confession. I said, well, come to see me. But at the same time, we can talk about it, and we can, if you need the sacrament, we can give you the sacrament. But I said, this is the important thing, is that if you're not ready, that's okay. Let's find a way to make this ready. Now, just so you know, there are people who receive the Eucharist believing they are in mortal sin, or don't receive the Eucharist believing they are mortal sin, and then they come to me and come to find out they're not in mortal sin. Let me give you an example. It is not a sin, a mortal sin to be divorced. You'd be surprised how many people out there will not receive the Eucharist because they believe and have been told by priests, not necessarily this priest in Patrick Madrid's column, but by priests like the priest in Patrick Madrid's column, that they can't receive the Eucharist because they are divorced. That's not true. That is not true. So this is one of the issues that you deal with. And so that's what I say. If you're not ready, then come talk to me. We can talk, obviously, after Mass or at another time, make an appointment or whatever the case may be. But if you feel you're not ready and you choose not to receive the Eucharist, that's okay. That's okay. That actually honors God. Other than that, if you want to come down, and I talked about receiving the Eucharist. COVID was a perfect time to do that because people were skittish on receiving the Eucharist. Now, why is this important? Because what's this guy? This guy gives a fire and brimstone. This priest gives a fire and brimstone homily, a sermon, not a homily, and he leaves because he was a guest speaker. He leaves. He goes probably to another state, and he can do that. And then he leaves some people believing, well, usually if you make a scolding remark, I know that some people here, the people who will hear it are not the people that you directed it to. And the people you directed it to will not hear it. It's amazing. So there are probably people in that congregation that are going to be terrified about receiving the Eucharist because they feel maybe they have a mortal sin, and they don't. And that's an important thing. That's part of this other thing, people going around. There are certain people that have mortal sins on their soul and they don't know it. You can't accidentally commit a mortal sin. It doesn't work that way. It's like you can't accidentally rob a bank. So that's all he preached, was there are winners and losers will end up in hell. I hate that language. And he didn't really talk about the importance of what confession really does, the importance of the Eucharist, how you approach the Eucharist. He just, winners and losers. Those days are gone, and I hope they're gone forever. And I did not like Patrick Madrid's column. We'll be back right after this.
You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at CatholicAudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. Well, tomorrow we're going to look at Philip baptizing an Ethiopian official. So that's going to be interesting. We'll see that, and we'll talk about all that, and then see what I talk about in the second half. You notice second half, I try to make it something completely different. And that's based on the idea of the radio show. Remember that we had two radio shows. We had a morning show early in the morning on WEZE. This early morning radio show that was doing exactly what we do in the first half of the program. And then the afternoon show was doing the second half of the program, looking at some of the issues. So this is kind of like a continuation. The podcast is a combination of the both. In the meantime, we will be back tomorrow. Remember to subscribe. Remember to like, comment. If you have any comments you'd like to send me a note or anything, I'm at producer@CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's producer@CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also find us at CatholicAudiomedia.com, and you can find my Substack at CatholicAudiomedia.substack.com. We'll be right back tomorrow.
Yeah, you know the real is back. Father Carr Chaplain from the city of champions, dropping daily reflections coming straight from the field. The raw truth revealed for the strong-willed. It's the greatest act of defiance podcast with your host Father Carr, a message built to last. The greatest act of defiance podcast. That's right, the greatest act of defiance. Word up. Word up. Word up.
The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.